At this part of our lecture, you might actually been thinking that these are already contents relating to the psychology of the self. You are actually correct, but having to divide it in another chapter would not actually change anything, since by the time we would also decide to study, we would be incorporating everything. So I will just include things here. So at this part of the lecture, we will be talking about Freud's psychosexual stages. And Freud believed in his theory of psychoanalysis that development entails dealing with conflict even up until the person's adult stage or senescence or old age. The psychosexual stages include five developmental periods, namely the oral, anal, phallic, latency, and genital stages. You might actually find it um, weird since Freud used bold labels, and some theorists actually complained about such labels, and they thought that Freud's conceptualizations were basically about polymorphous perversion. But according to some psychoanalysts, Freud just emphasized the different erogenous zones to where the impetus and the need is concentrated in the different developmental or psychosexual stages. Each psychosexual stage is marked by a potential conflict between a parent and the child. And according to Freud, conflicts arise as a child seeks pleasure from different body areas that are associated with sexual feelings. Um, for the psychosexual stages, each psychosexual stage, as mentioned earlier, has this identified body part where the impetus is concentrated. So the erogenous zones are the parts of the body capable of producing sexual pleasure. So just like, for example, the label earlier, the first psychosexual stage is about the oral stage. And we could basically have an idea that the erogenous zone of the first psychosexual stage is the mouth. And for infants, infants are prone to also experience primary narcissism. So this is the part where infants' libido or psychic energy is centered on the ego, meaning they are not able to relate and feel how other people feel, and all they wish is just to satisfy themselves without even thinking of how other people are suffering for them to be satisfied with whatever need that they want to also satisfy. Remember that narcissism started with a Greek character who is a hunter named Narcissus, who also fell in love with himself after he was able to also um, see his own image in the river or in the water. Narcissism, also as a personality disorder, is about being egocentric, just like an infant, incapable of understanding other people, incapable of empathizing other people's feelings because they want to be the center of the attention. They want the limelight. They enjoy associating themselves with people who are part of the elite society. They actually think of themselves more often than think of other people's sake. Now, secondary narcissism is the redirection of the libido to ego during puberty onwards. It means that the libido is now channeled to another individual. So it could be that when a person would start to also form relationships with another individual or an intimate partner, it means that all the wishes and the desires will be channeled to that person, and the individual would be demanding attention, nourishment, care from the intimate partner, just like a child wanting to have the attention of the parent. But this time, the libido is now channeled to the intimate partner. And that's why when a person would be entering into a relationship, they could be demanding of the person's time, the lover's attention, and that nobody else could be able to enjoy the partner's attention, but only him or just like in the concept of the physical science or physics, the psychic energy, which is the libido, it can't be created nor destroyed. It can only be transformed. We have talked about fixation back in the defense mechanism section, and for every psychosexual stage, especially the first three stages, um, individuals are prone to also experience a potential personality problem during the oral, anal, and the phallic stages. It refers to a Freudian process through which an individual may be locked into a particular psychosexual stage because his or her wishes were either over gratified or under gratified. So let's try to look into these conditions. Now, the first psychosexual stage is the oral stage, which lasts for the first 18 months. The pleasure seeking activities include sucking, chewing, and also biting. Fixation, as mentioned, would likely happen to adults who continue to engage in oral activities, like, for example, overeating, gum chewing, or smoking. Oral activities can be symbolic as well as being overly demanding or mouthing off. So, meaning to say, individuals who are likely to be under gratified in this particular psychosexual stage would likely uh, manifest certain fixation in their adult life. So, try to also ask yourself if you were weaned earlier from being breastfed by your mother, like in the first 2 months, your mother decided to stop breastfeeding you, and since that particular need was under gratified, then adults or later on in our adult life, we are likely to also be fixated in the oral stage that may result to thumb sucking, smoking, beer drinking or alcohol drinking, and many other forms of oral fixation. Other individuals may actually be nagging or prone to also demean other individuals because of either being over gratified or under gratified in this particular stage. The second stage is the anal stage, wherein it lasts within 1.5 to 3 years. And this is the time when the infant's pleasure seeking is centered in the anus and its functions of elimination. Remember, during this time, a parent is now trying to potty train the child. Now, if parents are successful in potty training their children, they are likely to be happy. But if not, then they would sometimes cajole or beg for them to follow them and be conscious of cleanliness. For this particular stage fixation, it may result into adults who continue to engage in activities of retention or elimination. So for retention, um, if parents are basically successful in potty training their children, adults may actually be so conscious about being neat, and they could be stingy or behaviorally rigid, meaning they are so strict about following orders, being organized, and being neat at home or anything that is related to cleanliness. And this is because of the requests of the parents that they need to be neat, they need to maintain cleanliness, and things must be in place. On the other hand, when fixation is about elimination, then they could actually be generous, they could be messy, or they could behave very loose or carefree. So when parents are not successful in also training their children, they could actually result into these behaviors relating to elimination of the anal stage, which is also considered as a fixation. They could either be generous, they could also be messy, or they could also lack that stern decision or willpower to be in control of themselves. You might not actually have a clue right now as to how were you able to be trained by your parents back then, and simply you can answer that by asking them. Try to ask your parents how many months have they decided to wean you from uh, breastfeeding, and this time for the anal stage, were they successful enough to potty train you? And you could also understand that the first two stages might actually be having some relevance in the kind of fixation that you might actually be experiencing in your life. Now, the third stage of Freud's psychosexual stages is the phallic stage. It is in the early childhood, which lasts starting at about 3 to 6 years, and infants' pleasure seeking is centered on the genitals. So during this stage, there is also that concept of Oedipus Complex, wherein a male child would try to also compete with the father for the affections and pleasures of the mother. So as you can observe, this is already the part where some theorists have also complained that it is not actually possible for a child to have desires over a parent. But still, Freud insisted that this could be part of the unconscious motivation that all of us have also underwent. And remember, this is part of the story of Oedipus, who also fell in love with his own mother and eventually ended up marrying his own mother. So this is the Oedipus complex, being in the state of competition with the father. The Oedipus complex, after it would be resolved, this is also resolved by the male child identifying with the father. So after the said competition, it would be resolved by the male child trying to adopt and to accept the father's masculinity. So through the process of identification, there are some parts of the father's behavior that could be incorporated with the child's personality. Now, you might actually have a question about identification and introjection. They are quite similar when we talk about these two defense mechanisms. Introjection is basically accepting a certain thought and assumption without even trying to analyze it. And it may start with introjection, and later identification would also follow. So to further discuss about Oedipus complex, a male child discovers that his penis is a source of pleasure and at the same time a source of power, because after observing that the father also has a penis and the mother also gives attention and care to the father, it may actually result into feelings of hatred, jealousy, and competition towards his father, and fears castration. So in this process, after identifying that the father has a penis, and since the father is actually bigger than the child, then the child would also fear that the father might actually cut his penis, a process which we call castration anxiety. And again, as mentioned, Oedipus complex can be resolved through the identification of the child with his own father. So this is the time when the child begins to follow how the father dresses, how the father behaves, and likely the kind of occupation that the child dreams of having in the future. So by that time, that is also a signal for us that the Oedipus complex have been resolved. On the other hand, for females, a process called Electra Complex would also happen. And Freud um, presented this concept of penis envy, wherein a girl discovers that she doesn't have one, and the female would eventually be at a loss, a feeling of being lost in the world. And this is somehow the concept that Karen Horney tried to also contend by also questioning that this is not actually true, since she herself did not also underwent the process of Electra Complex. She wasn't actually um, feeling jealous about her father's penis. But to continue, such feeling of being lost or such loss may make the female child to turn against her mother and develop sexual desires for her father. And this is also what is true with how Electra, as a Greek character, was presented. And as you can also observe that a female child may actually be so close to the father, and that is also the time that Electra complex, according to Freud, could actually be happening. And such condition may actually be resolved uh, by the female child identifying with the mother's femininity. So moving forward to the next stage, which is the latency stage, and this is the time for middle to late childhood, which starts at age 6 to puberty. And this is the time when the child represses sexual thoughts and engages in non-sexual activities. Because this is the time when the child would start to also go to school or school age and develop social and intellectual skills during the puberty stage. And this is also the time when sexuality reappears. So, as mentioned by Freud and emphasized, the sexual thoughts and desires are being repressed. So, it only entails that those who perform pretty much or well in school could actually be those individuals who may also be repressing of their sexual desires, if we are to look into Freud's conceptualization of his psychosexual stage. The last stage is the genital stage, wherein it starts at puberty until adulthood, and this is the time when the individual has renewed sexual desires that he or she seeks to fulfill through relationships with other people. And this is not already with a desired feeling and affection towards a parent, but this is already diverted and rechanneled sexual desire with another individual and an intimate partner, perhaps. And the conflicts resolution depends on how conflicts in the first three stages were resolved. So just one tip to remember Freud's psychosexual stages. It is actually designing some mnemonics like OAPLG. So it means that the psychosexual stage starts with the oral, anal, phallic latency, and genital stage. So this time we will now go to Freud's followers and critics. So first is Carl Jung. Jung was a devoted follower of Freud until about 1914. So most of the individuals from Vienna did not expect that Freud would become popular until he was able to also gain some followers, and his name was even um, popular in the United States. Jung, Carl Jung, split with Freud because he disagreed with his emphasis on the sex drive. Rather, he believed with the conceptualization of the collective unconscious and not sex to be the basic force in the development of personality. In other words, Jung believed that all of us actually have this collective unconscious, wherein a particular culture would actually have a pool of consciousness that we begin to also understand our roles. Like, no one educated a person who is now a parent on how to become one, like a nurturing a mother, and nobody also introduced that idea that people as they age would also entail that they would increase their knowledge and wisdom. But we have in different cultures, we do have those kinds of conceptualizations. And Jung was also the one who introduced that as a person, as part of his personality theory. So the collective unconscious consists of the ancient memory traces and symbols that are passed on by birth and are shared by all peoples in all cultures, as I have mentioned previously. And he termed his own personality theory as analytical psychology. Another critic of Freud who also claimed that he did not associate himself and could never associate himself as Freud's student is Alfred Adler. He voiced his disagreement with Freud at one of the society's meetings, since at that time Freud was already forming a Thursday group, and Adler disagreed with Freud's theory that humans are governed by biological and sexual urges. Instead, he proposed that humans are motivated by social urges, meaning as we get to engage with meaningful conversations with other people, we begin to also dream. We learn from our interactions with other people, and that is also the time when we would be conscious about our own status. And that's the time when we would be dreaming something for ourselves. Adler believed that each person is a social being with a unique personality, and he eventually formed his own group, and his own philosophy became a personality theory called individual psychology. And he also emphasized that we are aware of our motives and goals, and we have the capacity to guide and plan for our futures. Just to give you a picture of Adler's individual psychology, he believed that we have this strivings towards our goals. So we have strivings for our own goals. So it could be striving for inferiority or striving for superiority. So when we talk about striving for inferiority, these are people striving for power because they are intentionally striving for control and take advantage of other people's weaknesses. And he actually labeled it as inferiority because having to have all the power and to also take advantage of other people's weaknesses would only lead to inferiority. While on the other hand, striving for superiority is when a person would be able to also relate himself and be able to help other people with basis of social interest. Another critique of Freud is Karen Horney. Again, her family name is Horney, not the other way how you read it. She is a trained psychoanalyst of Freud himself, and her career peaked after Freud's death, and she became the dean of the American Institute of Psychoanalysis in New York. But basically, she was very vocal of some of her contentions against Freud's conceptualizations. She objected to Freud's view of women being dependent, vain, and submissive because of biological forces and childhood sexual experiences. So, as you can see, Karen Horney defended the position of females in Freud's position on how he tried to present women, especially that during their time, women were actually not given much of the attention. And growing up in a patriarchal family, Freud emphasized so much about the roles of men. And Karen Horney also took the issue with Freud's idea of the penis envy. So, as mentioned earlier, she was also the one very vocal about her negation against Freud's idea of the penis envy, meaning she wasn't actually um, able to experience back when she was still a child that she got actually jealous or envious about her father's penis. So Karen Horney's personality development idea of personality development, she believed that women or men can be found in the child-parent social interactions. And Horney theorized that child-parent conflicts are avoidable if the child is raised in a loving, trusting, and secure environment. So this is also contrary to what Freud presented in his psychosexual stages. On the other hand, Karen emphasized that we have three ways of dealing with or in our lives, and that is moving towards, moving against, or moving away. So, meaning if we are in a safe environment, we are likely to move toward our goals, move toward people. But if we are threatened in the kind of environment that we are into, we may actually move against, meaning we may actually retaliate. We might form certain social groups against those who are in power. And another trend could be moving away, which entails that we move away, we isolate ourselves, we try to move and detach ourselves from people. And later in her life, Karen Horney founded the Psychology of Women. So this is the start of the feminist psychology, wherein they empowered most women who are taking up psychology to also conduct researches relating to women-related studies. After the psychoanalysts' reign in the picture or in the field of psychology, the humanistic theories also came about in the picture. So the humanists believe that an individual could be able to achieve his or her own potential. So Maslow or Abraham Maslow introduced to us the hierarchy of needs or the pyramid, which relates to self-actualization in the end. So the hierarchy of needs, as you are familiar to it, um, it is arranged in a particular ascending order, and the biological needs at the bottom and the social and personal needs on top. Maslow's hierarchy emphasized that the lower needs must be satisfied, just like the biological needs, before using energy to fulfill our personal and social needs, which speaks likely that we need to be nourishing ourselves physiologically before we could be able to also think about our goals in life. So anyone who is hungry, thirsty, or having that need to also pee wouldn't actually be thinking about achieving, getting a license, or finishing his or her studies without satisfying the physiological need first. So we are also prone to devote time and energy to reach true potential, which Maslow called self-actualization. So just to illustrate, this is the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and we need to be satisfying first our physiological needs, which include sex, and not actually about having that desire to be in sexual contact with someone, but basically it tells us that sex is a physiological need for our own survival, our clan survival, and also for procreation. The next need is for safety. So we need to be secure and safe. That's why we need a house or a roof over our head. And we need to uh, be living in a safe environment before we could also be satisfying that love and belongingness, which is the third item in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And thereafter, we would also be nourishing ourselves after we feel that we belong to a certain family, to a certain society. So we would now be focusing more on trying to also develop our esteem needs. So that is the time when we would be focusing on our goals. It All the journey toward achieving those goals would eventually develop our self-esteem, and we would gain respect from other people, and soon we will also be reaching that self-actualization stage where it is about morality, creativity, spontaneity, problem solving, and without prejudice, and also acceptance of other people's condition or acceptance of facts. So self-actualization, according to Maslow, refers to the development and the fulfillment of one's unique human potential. So this is the time when we begin to develop ourselves and be able to be in that different level of ourselves as we try to also improve our sense of well-being and psychological maturity. So characteristics of self-actualized individuals include they perceive reality accurately, they are independent and autonomous, they couldn't be influenced by other people, they have their own decisions that they are able to decide for themselves, and they prefer to have a deep, loving relationship with only a few people. So as we go along with life, we soon realize that we are actually building meaningful and deeper associations with other individuals whom we trust. We focus on accomplishing our goals and report peak experiences like moments of great joy and satisfaction with our lives. Now, another humanist or theorist is Carl Ransom Rogers. Rogers called his own personality theory as the person-centered theory, and based on two major assumptions that Personality development is guided by each person's unique self-actualization tendency, and each of us has a personal need for positive regard, meaning all of us need to be treated fairly, need to be treated in a positive way. And because of that need, we must also be able to also reciprocate that and do positive regard towards other individuals. Rogers' self-actualization tendency, it refers to an inborn tendency for us to develop all of our capacities in ways that best maintain and benefit our lives. It relates to biological functions and meeting basic need for food, water, and oxygen. So Rogers' person-centered theory focused on psychological functions, meaning it is about expanding our experiences, encouraging personal growth, and becoming self-sufficient. And all of us have this self-concept, meaning it refers to how we see ourselves and how we describe and present it to others. And when we describe ourselves in a positive way, it refers to the positive self concepts that we have about ourselves. So we tend to act, feel, and think optimistically about ourselves and constructively. But pertaining to negative self concepts, that is the time when we think about ourselves, act and think pessimistically and destructively about ourselves. Now, Rogers identified and conceptualized positive regard as the love, the sympathy, warmth, acceptance, and respect which we crave from our family, friends, and people important to us. So we need to have and receive that positive regard in order for us to feel good about ourselves. And when we could um, embrace and receive those positive regard coming from the people important to us, then we could actually be fulfilling our needs that towards that self-actualization which Rogers actually meant. And sadly, not all of us could actually receive those positive regards. Sometimes it becomes conditional, meaning when we do good, we could receive those positive regard from people, from our family. But if not, then we could not also receive any. And that's why Rogers believed that there are conditions, certain conditions, and not all individuals could be able to receive such positive regard from people important to them. That's why he emphasized in his theory that all individuals must be able to also show unconditional positive regard, which is the warmth, the acceptance, and the love that others show because you are valued as a human being. So what I'm trying to say here is that no matter how um, bad your past was, even if a person is a criminal, if they want to also see changes in the person's behavior, then unconditional positive regard must also be given uh, wholeheartedly to the person should they wish to see changes in the individual. So even though you may disappoint people by behaving in ways that are different from the standards or the values of the way people think. So without any hesitation or restrictions, without conditions, unconditional positive regard could be given to individuals. And imagine if our therapist behaves that way, then a change, according to Carl Rogers, change could actually happen to an individual given an unconditional positive regard. That's why in his book, Becoming a Person, on Becoming a Person, he emphasized that people should be given respect even if they have also violated other people. And if we wish to see changes with other people's behavior, then what we can actually do is to give them that unconditional positive regard. Regardless of their past, people are basically geared towards changing themselves. Okay? And it's hard, you know, to also do that. And that's why each and every day it's a challenge for us to also forgive and give that unconditional positive regard towards other people. Okay? And Rogers also stressed the importance of self actualization, and he recognized that our tendency for self actualization may be hindered, tested for, or blocked by a variety of situational hurdles or personal difficulties.